We started the year talking about the cellular level of life, that all living things are made up of one or more cells. Then we progressed to looking at the five kingdoms of living things. We studied everything from the tiniest bacteria and single celled protists to fungi, plants, and finally animals. We looked at their body systems and how they were organized, whether by the type of symmetry or the sophistication in their nerves and guts. From the bilaterally symmetrical earthworm to the amazing cephalopods that can change, mimic, and hide like a ninja. The world around us is full of amazing creatures. And we aren't leaving them behind, but rather, we're going to start looking at how all of these different creatures interact with each other and the environment around them. This is the study of ecology. Like a good scientist, we love to organize the things around us. In the same way that we organize living things from cells to tissues, tissues to organs, organs to organ systems, we can also organize the living things within their environments. Think of an organism like the human being. When we take a group of humans together, we call that a family. Ecologists call a group of the same organisms a population. Many families living in a particular area, like Swansea, would make up a town, just like several populations would make up a community. Take it one step larger, and you have an ecosystem, all of the living things and their surroundings. Go another step larger, and you have a biome, and then the largest group would be the biosphere, or the whole world. Let's take a look at these categories, starting from largest to smallest. The biosphere, the one and only. Bio means living, and sphere means, well, sphere, the three-dimensional circle that we live on, planet Earth. We have one biosphere, one area of our world that contains all of the living things on our planet. It's the soil, the air, and the surface where living things can grow. And since we only have that one biosphere, we need to take care of it. If we break up the biosphere into different areas or zones, we call these biomes. Biomes are geographical areas, or areas on a map that have similar soil types and similar climates. These two features, soil type and climate, will allow certain types of organisms to live there. Think of it this way. Why can't we grow bananas in New Hampshire? Because it's way too cold and way too dry. If you look at a map, we are located in the eastern temperate forest biome. Bananas require certain types of weather and certain types of soil to grow. They do much better in tropical areas. We don't have the right conditions here. We're not part of the right biome. However, we do have a lot of pine trees up here. And if I look around the world and see who has similar soil and similar climate to New Hampshire, you can bet I'll find pine trees, similar types of plants and animals in those locations that we have here. It's because we share a common type of biome, and those biomes have particular conditions that support very particular kinds of organisms. There are several different biomes that ecologists have identified across our planet. While it's not important for you to memorize these biomes, it is important that you notice the characteristics. This list of 6 forests alone shows you the variety of environments that we have on our planet. A temperate or mild deciduous forest, like we have here in New Hampshire, looks and feels very different than a tropical rainforest in Brazil or a scrub forest in the Midwest. These are also different kinds of drier areas like tundra and desert, as well as savannas and grasslands and their lower growing plants. And finally, we have the mountains and various aquatic biomes, like freshwater lakes and streams, oceans and seas, and even the ice caps. Each of these unique biomes is home to its own set of plants and animals that are adapted to live in those environments. This community of interacting organisms and their habitat are called an ecosystem. This includes all of the plants and fungi, also known as flora, animals, known as fauna, microscopic life like protists and bacteria, as well as the water and soil features present. That could be anything from a waterfall to a mountain. An ecosystem is dynamic. That means it's always changing because the earth and the living things on earth are always changing. So the interactions between them are also changing. Observing nature has captivated the interest of humans since the dawn of time because it's never boring. This is where we're going to focus at the level of the ecosystem. We're going to spend some time looking at the living things within an environment and the interactions between them. Each living thing on Earth has some sort of home. Remember back to first quarter when we were talking about the four bare necessities? This is it. All living things need a place to live. We call that place to live their habitat. Some habitats are extremely large, like an entire ocean for migrating whales, while some are very tiny, also known as microhabitats, like one small rotting log for a colony of bacteria. Regardless of its size, all habitats have to contain everything that an organism needs to survive: food, water, air. Let's think back to that first quarter when we were identifying the types of things we'd talk about in biology class: living things. If you remember, we call these living things organisms or biotic factors. Bio, we know, means living, and factor is just a fancy word for thing. All of these biotic factors or living things have to display each of the six characteristics of living things. Do you remember? Think back, test yourself, see if you can do them. Here we go. Are you ready? Number one, made of one or more cells. Number two, obtains and uses energy. Number three, grows and develops. Number four, senses and responds to change. Number five, has the ability to reproduce. And last but not least, has DNA or RNA or both. These biotic factors in an environment range from the tiniest bacteria to a large cluster of trees competing for sunlight in a rainforest. Abiotic factors, on the other hand, are the non living things in an ecosystem. Now remember, don't confuse non living with dead. Non living or abiotic means that they were never alive and never will be. The sun is a critical part of life here on Earth, but there isn't a single cell within it. It's merely a massive ball of hydrogen and helium over 93 million miles away, burning in our sky. But still, it's so important. Despite the fact that water and rocks and air and the sun are all non living, they still play a critical role in the ever changing nature of our ecosystems here on Earth. It's these interactions that make studying the Earth so interesting for ecologists and for us. At the root of almost every interaction is the primary need for food. Whether the interactions involve foxes eating rabbits or rabbits eating the grass, their interactions are driven by their need for food, their need for obtaining energy to be used in their life processes. It's all about survival. Let's look at this first set of interactions. This is called a food chain. Food chains are very simple illustrations showing how organisms within an ecosystem interact. First, I want you to notice the arrows. Picture the arrow pointing to the belly where it's going. It seems silly, but trust me, it works. I see here grass gets energy from the sun and water. Grass, like all plants, is a producer because it makes its food from the sun, from photosynthesis. A grasshopper eats the grass. That makes him a consumer because he's eating another living thing. Another consumer comes along, a snake. He eats the grasshopper for his energy source. Then a hawk eats the snake. Eventually, the hawk dies, we'll say of old age, and his body is decomposed by fungi, returning the nutrients back to the soil where the plant can continue to grow, restarting the chain all over again. Simple, right? Well, sort of. Food chains are lovely in their simplicity, but they aren't as true to life as we'd like them to be. A more accurate representation of an ecosystem is illustrated in what we call a food web. Much like a spider web, you'll see that the interactions between living things are actually much more complex. Foxes don't just eat one thing, they eat five different things. And sometimes, like spiders and predaceous insects, different living things can eat each other. The arrows are the same here. They are pointing to the belly of the eater. For example, what does the hawk eat? Follow the arrows that point to the hawk, and you'll see the organisms that are going into his belly. We have rabbits, squirrels, mice, seed eating birds, and insectivorous birds. He's got quite an appetite. Even though it's complex, this looks like it's working. Everything has food, so everything can survive. Okay, but what would happen if a disease came in and killed off all the mice? Or something sprayed this environment with insecticides, bug killing chemicals? Would everything still be okay? As our environment is constantly changing and our organisms are constantly changing, they're always trying to find a balance. We call that balance homeostasis. You may remember this word from the beginning of the year when we were talking about how chemicals move in and move out of a cell membrane, and it was that cell was always trying to find a balance. For an ecosystem, homeostasis would occur when everyone has what they need. No one is starving, no one is overpopulated, everything is in balance. So, what would cause a disruption in this balance? There are several natural factors that can affect the balance or homeostasis of an ecosystem. First, weather and events like hurricanes and tsunamis are incredibly destructive. Fire, incredibly destructive. But there's also factors that we can control, like humans taking over land, cutting down forests, or introducing non native species of animals into different ecosystems. These are often invasive species, meaning they take over since there's no natural predators for them and wreak havoc on the food web of that ecosystem, throwing things into chaos and imbalance. Often, this can lead to extinction of one or more species and extreme destruction to an ecosystem. When an environment becomes stressed by an imbalance, it often results in a lack of resources for the organisms living there. With less resources, the environment can no longer support the same amount of living things. The amount of organisms an environment can support is called its carrying capacity. When the population numbers reach or exceed their carrying capacity, they have three choices. Those organisms can die, move, or adapt. It seems harsh, but that's the way nature works. Unfortunately, it's very hard for animals to adapt. You can't just tell a deer to start eating something entirely different or tell a plant not to need the sunshine. If possible, animals will sometimes move to a new area to find their food choice. If they can't, they'll die. This is the most common result of a population exceeding its carrying capacity. This is the reason that seasonal hunting is allowed. New Hampshire and other states that have large deer populations will do this. Unfortunately, there aren't enough natural resources to feed every deer that's born in the wild, so a certain amount of hunting licenses are issued for a window of time. This allows people to hunt the deer, reducing the deer's population to a number that's within the carrying capacity for our ecosystem. And the hope is that the hunters are eating the deer they hunt, thus using their nutrients and not wasting it. Every living thing has a role in an ecosystem, and that includes us. The plants feed the animals, and sometimes we eat the animals. Insects pollinate plants so that they can do their job. But if there were no pollinators, then we wouldn't have enough new plants to replace the ones that get eaten, eventually killing off the plant population. If there's no plants, then the animals that eat those plants won't have food. They would then either die, move, or adapt. The balance of life is tricky and it is constantly changing. We'll continue our investigation of ecosystems over the next several days to look at food chains, food webs, and the dynamic balancing act that they all perform to continue life here on Earth.